first thing is we have the beginnings of a jig here that we're going to build. Let me walk you through how I got to this stage, and then we'll build the rest of the jig together. The first thing I did was go out and buy a 2x4 piece of 3/4 inch MDF. Brought that home, and then I ripped a 12-inch wide section of that. After ripping that 12-inch wide section, I then took that section and the other half, which was just a little bit under 12 inches, and then I cross-cut both of those to 24 inches wide. I marked one of my 12 by 24 inch pieces as my base. Then I ripped two 5.5 inch wide pieces to make up one side of the jig. And then I ripped two 4-inch wide pieces to make up the other side of the jig. Now that I had these 4 separate pieces, one of one width and one of another, I came over to the bench and just with some screws, 4 screws each in the corners, I screwed together those pieces of MDF. And next I went over to the jointer and I jointed all the edges of the 5.5 inch and the 4-inch wide pieces, as well as my extra offcut piece, which is my fence, and I jointed one edge of that as well. With all those faces now jointed, I came over to the bench, flipped over the base, and screwed in the 5.5 inch wide pieces to the bottom of the base. And that now brings us here. The next thing we're going to do is create some holes and some grooves so we can use these screws and these hold downs to create to allow us to move this fence back and forth, as well as diagonal a little bit, so that we can line this up with the groove that we drew when we found where the panel was going into the arm. The first thing we're going to do is come over here and find out where we need to put both our holes and the grooves and the fence. For the holes, the reason I left the screws facing up for these pieces, as well as the screws being exposed on the bottom, is that I know where metal is, so that I can now place new metal and holes without running into that metal. So what I want to do is find a place to put a screw in on both sides that'll enable the fence to go back and forth, as well as tilt a little bit too. With my square here, I'm a little bit over an inch in on the top screws here. Let's find out where I am on the bottom screws. For those, I'm, let's say, 1.5 inches in. So what I want to do is make sure I stay away from these bottom screws, and then put my screw that's going to go on each side, either in between these or away from them, but close to the edge. So what I'm going to do is set these 1.5 inches in. So I'm just going to come here, mark a line on both sides for 1.5 inches. I'm going to come in roughly 2.5 inches. Now that I have those marks, the first thing we can drill is the hole for our nut, or for the end of the screw. And while I'm here, I'm just going to carry these lines all the way around to the other side as well. So we are 1.5 inches in. Be safe, I'm going to carry the line down to the bottom as well. Okay, we're here at the drill press, and the first thing we're going to do is drill a hole that's wider in diameter than the washer we're going to place on the bottom. Now, for me, that's a 7/8 of an inch Forstner bit that I'm going to use. It's a little bit wider in diameter than this, and the nice thing it's also going to do is, because the Forstner bit, it's got the tip at the end, and that'll allow me to center into the hole with another bit to drill the clearance hole for the screw itself. So I just drilled in the full depth of the bit. And when I did that, what it also does, it leaves a nice little dimple or point where, from the point of the tip, where I can then take my next bit and drill a nice clearance hole. So let me do the other side. Now that we drilled a hole for the washer, it's time to draw a clearance hole for the actual screw itself. So I got a brad point bit in here. It's 3/8 of an inch wide, and that's wider than my screw here. So I'm just going to use it, the brad point, and line that up with the divot from the Forstner bit, and we'll drill right through. Awesome. These are through. Now you can take your washer and your screw and go all the way through. Let's head over to the bench and work on marking the locations for the slots or grooves in our fence. Well, it happened. I made a mistake. We should have drilled the first hole a lot deeper than I ended up doing. So what happens is, if you take the fence and what you're going to use on the other side to clamp this down, it can't grab the screw. There's not enough of the screw coming through. So I got to drill a little bit deeper. I'm going to measure it, find out how much it is, and tell you in a minute. All right, all fixed. I can now take my fence, and if this was inside in a groove, I can now tighten it and attach it to the screw. So I ended up going a full inch deep. When I did the first pass, it was a 1/2 inch. So I just ended up drilling another 1/2 inch for a full inch deep with the Forstner bit. Okay, we're back here at the bench, and one of the reasons why I drew these lines up on top of the what will be the clamping part where the fence will attach is so that I could take the fence and then match it up and draw lines across the fence so I know where I should put my grooves. Now, how wide should those grooves be is the next question. Stop. Instead of listening to me talk for another minute or two and being wrong, let me just tell you that a 1/4 inch wide slot is perfect. I have a 1/4 inch bit in the router table right now, and the reason for that is 1/2 inch is a lot to remove at once. So I'm just going to try to remove a little bit on each side, and then I'll remove the rest of it. Let me walk you through the setup here. The first thing I did was I took my square and I drew in a line 3/4 of an inch from each side on the fence and brought that line all the way to the edge. Then, with the fence close to the bit, I was able to take the fence itself, align it up to each edge of the bit, and then put in these 2 stops and clamp them to limit the travel between these 2 lines. After that, I then moved the fence back until I roughly eyeballed where the bit itself would be centered inside the line. I'm going to lower the bit now about halfway the thickness of this 3/4 inch MDF. I'm going to do one pass with it at that, and I'll do the next pass with it at full height. on the original jig I made the holes for the grooves in the fence much wider. Upon a little bit of inspection here, the 1/4 inch is actually really good. It gives a ton of travel for the fence itself, so that's perfect. So I'm going to leave it at a 1/4 inch. Forget the 1/2 inch. 1/4 inch is great, and the screws are a little less than a 1/4 inch, and everything's moving perfectly. Lock it in, and it's not moving anywhere. So now what we need to do is take the router and get this set up and route out a groove for ourselves. One thing before that, if you wanted to make yours a little bit more fancy or maybe thought out, you would actually do the same thing here as I did at the fence with the other piece here we're going to clamp in. I'm going to clamp it. I'm just going to use these light duty clamps. And just like the heavier duty versions of these Jorgensens that I have, the heads swivel. So I can then, it allows me to apply clamping pressure in the same direction, horizontal or parallel, I should say, to the clamp bar itself. So I'm going to use that to clamp the arm into the 2 pieces of MDF. If you wanted to do the same thing with these guys that let you, with a groove and let you slide back and forth, push it really tight and then clamp it, that probably work well too. Either way, I'm going to clamp this guy up and we'll walk through setting this up. Okay, I have the outer edge clamping the arm inside of this fence area. These guys are clamped down nice and tight, and I also clamped down the whole jig to the bench. You'll see I have the router on top right now, and what I'm looking to do with the router set on top is to adjust the fence back and forth and at an angle so that the bit goes right into the middle of the line, both at the rear of the arm and the front of the arm. So let's go get that set up. So the process of setting this up is a little bit of give and take and back and forth. First thing you'll do is take the router, and I'm using a smaller router, full-size router maybe it's fine too. But I'm going to take the router and center it inside of the groove. Kind of move my fence around. And I'm going to give it, tighten it up, but just enough that I can still move a little bit. Then I'm going to take the router towards the end and then align the bit so that the cutting parts, the very edges, are inside of our little spot here. The line, that is. Once I get that here, I'm going to tighten that one up too. Now that I set that side, I'm a little off over here. So I need to just loosen the fence a little bit and move it in. Tighten that, and then come back down and check my settings on the other end. Let's check the travel. It goes through the center very nicely. So now that I have the center marked, let's do the edges. Now I take the bit and I rotate it so that the very tip of the cutting edge is on the outside towards the wall or the end of the groove. So once I get it set, so it's just before that line, I'm going to take a piece of plywood and some double stick tape. Place that double stick tape on the actual jig. Pull up the backing. With the backing up and off, I can now take my piece of plywood, rest it against the fence, butt it up against the side of the router, and then now have a stop. We'll do the other side as well. Over here, I don't have as much room on this end, but that's okay. So same thing, you rotate the bit so that the cutting side is on the very far edge as it meets the line. And we don't want to go all the way to the line. We'll chisel back with to the line, but let's just get close to it. I'm just going to use this little piece of MDF. Alright, with the jig all set up, I know I've got my little stops there. They're not the prettiest, but they're going to work. And they're being held down with this double stick tape. So I'm not going to just ram into them. Once I get into it, it'll be a nice light tap, and it can come back. I'm going to set the depth of my bit. It's going to be 3/8 of an inch. I'm not under, but maybe a hair over, like 3/8 and a 32nd or something. So I'll set the depth of the bit, and let's plow out this groove. Alright, we routed our groove and it looks great. I'm going to take this opportunity, I pulled some chisels out, and I'm just going to square off the ends here and extend all the way back to my lines. I'm just taking the chisel and walking it over to extend the groove. And then I'm just going to come down with this 1/4 inch chisel. Pare back. Now that I've squared it off and pared down the walls, I'm going to make sure on the sides and the walls that I make sure those are vertical. Okay, I squared up the ends of the groove and we're ready to start fitting the panel. Before we do that, I just wanted to say something real quick about the jig. The jig is height-wise is built so that when you mill this up, it is 1.5 inches thick. No more than that. If you do yours a little bit thicker than 1.5 inches, you'll have to add another layer of MDF. Instead of doing 2 above the base, you'll need to do 3. Well, I've got my planing board clamped into the vise on the bench, and I have the arm here with the groove all squared up and my dial caliper. And the reason I have this is because the width of the groove is about 0.254, 253, 254 inches. And earlier when I fit this panel on the bottom part here into the lower groove on the apron, I got that to match the groove there. However, my thickness up on top is just a little bit too much. I'm sitting around 0.271, yeah, about 0.271 inches. So I can either, over here it's 0.264, it's a little thinner over here than here. So I can either take sandpaper, which is what I'm going to do, or grab my plane and start planing back over here. At this point, I've already sanded the surface pretty well. And the other problem with this board too is that it's got a bow in it like this, or a cup like this, either way you want to look at it. It's going to be hard to plane it because it's not flat, so I'm going to be competing with trying to force it down and keeping it flat while running a plane over it, and I just probably won't get nice even strokes or even amounts of material being removed. So I'm just going to do this with sandpaper instead so I can focus on the top here on both sides. So let's get to it. Well, I threw some 150 grit paper on a new block or a different block. Started the 220 here, And I'm basically just going to attack the top of the 150 and then move back to the 220. There's just a lot of material to remove, and doing it just at 220 is going to take a long time. But I can go down a little bit and then come right back up. Making sure to stay away from the spot I've already sized at the bottom. We got a good fit. It's a little tight though, but we're working there, and every time I push in and I pull it out and try to fit it, I can see where the high spots are with the highlights that are here. So I'm just going to keep working this back until I get a nice solid fit all around. Okay, I keep working down, keep test fitting, and let's try another test fit. I have my square here set at 3/8 of an inch. This is the top. I'm just going to strike a couple of really light lines with the pencil so I know if I'm there or not. Okay, that's nice. Okay, it must still be tight in the center. When I push in, it's popping out, but I'm going to turn it over and give it a little bit of a whack. Well, not too much though. So I don't know if you can see the pencil lines, but I'm getting really close. I may be a little less than 1/8 of an inch. All right, there. That only took forever, but it's just really important to go slow. So the panel looks great. It fits in. It's nice and snug. It's got a great connection here at the bottom. Really nice and clean. I'm very happy with this. Let's go get this guy fit on the chair, and we'll be done with this part. We're going to need to unclamp the sides in order to get this arm in. We need to create enough room to have the panel sit into the upper rail, and then we can close everything together. We'll end up gluing the front together and the back together, and then we'll end up gluing the sides. I'm going to create a little bit of space here. Okay, perfect. Let's knock it back together and then make sure we have everything set for the right height. Yep, that's tightening up. I'm going to go grab the straight edge. And the straight edge, I'm just going to make sure that the rail's at the right height. A little bit of pressure. Okay, I'm right on the lines. I'm going to tap the rear leg in a little bit. Sounds rock solid. Just for fun, I'm going to grab the back assembly. So now that we have the panel and the arms set here, the next thing we need to do is find where our dowel location is in the arm. To do that, I have one of these guys here. So I drilled a 3/8 of an inch hole for a dowel in both of my front legs. This is for 3/8 inch dowels for finding center. So what we're going to do is take the arm off, well, move it up a little bit, place this into the hole, and then we're going to bring the arm down and use the little nice sharp point here to locate our dowel hole in our arm. Okay, I have the clamp off, and I'm just lifting the arm up slightly, and I'm gonna get this guy placed inside the hole there. Now with him placed in the hole, I can, using the pencil marks I made underneath, line everything up. And once I have that spot, press down. And by pressing down, I now make a dimple into the wood here, and I've now located what the center of the 3/8 inch dowel hole is going to be for the 1/4 inch dowel we're going to drill into the arm. You may not be able to get your arms off the panels and the mortise without causing any damage right here. This one was pretty easy, but this one's a little bit tighter. So I'm just going to unclamp the side a little bit, open up some space here, and take the arms out instead. We are here at the drill press, and I made a mistake. We're actually going to drill 3/8 of an inch holes here because I drilled 1/2 inch, I think, holes over there. So I have a 3/8 inch bit chucked up in the drill press, and I have some blue masking tape or blue tape set at just a tad over what 1/2 inch would be for the depth. And what we're going to do is center up the brad point on the bit to the dimple we made with the center finder for the 1/2 inch dowel. So you can see here, right there we have a little dimple there. And we're just going to take the drill press, locate the dimple and the brad point head, find the two of them, well, align the two of them, and then just drill in. Now, the reason why I didn't necessarily just mark lines here and then try to drill in the center was if you were off by a little bit when you first drilled into the legs, you may not be in center on the leg, and if you're not in center on the leg, then trying to drill in the center of this location isn't going to help you any. And actually for me, one of my legs is right dead on. That's the leg on the left hand side as you look towards the chair, and the leg on the right hand side as you look towards the chair is actually off a little bit on one side. So it happened to me, it can happen to you, and this is just a good dummy proof way of making sure you are right in where you should be when you're drilling. So let's get to it. All right, we drilled our holes for our 3/8 inch dowels here. And what we're going to do now is get the arms reset into the chair. I'm just going to come over here and set the arm in. And then get my arm into the panel. Grab a dead blow hammer and knock it down a little bit. Now that I'm lined up, I can bring everything together. And once you have everything together, we'll clamp it up. Okay, once you have the sides clamped up, the arm's going to move a little bit, and that's what we were really looking for here. Remember, the hole we drilled for the front legs is wider than the hole for the dowel in the arm, and that's on purpose. We're going to fill this with some epoxy when we put this together, and the epoxy is a gap filler. It's very strong, and we're going to set the dowel into the front leg of the epoxy, and then with a long open time, not the 5-minute epoxy or the 15-minute epoxy, I'm going to grab a 2-hour epoxy. And that'll allow us to find this perfect center spot here where the arm is centered on the front leg, and then we'll clamp it down. Okay, I got the left arm on. I haven't clamped the arms down, but I think we're good for now. So, isn't that hard? It's just a process. We need to make sure there's enough room to get the dowel into the hole and get the arm set onto the panel, and then we need to bring everything back together and set the clamp everything up. And you may have to actually do a couple taps with your dead blow hammer on the arm itself to get that fully seated into the panel. So everything looks great. I'm really happy. Let's move on.